So first, thanks very much for having me here tonight. I think it's really interesting to sort of see the sequence of speakers. In a lot of ways, what I'll be talking about tonight has to do with our approach to research, really understanding ourselves within not just a city or a provincial, but rather a regional landscape of institutions and industry partners and community needs and interests. A lot of this does turn on BIM. And at the end of the day, I think that this is primarily how we are trying to frame ourselves as an this now better, good? How we're trying to really present ourselves and present design-based research as a really critical component in a more disruptive landscape. So asking questions about how we enhance evidence-based research, how we facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration, and how we leverage that into real and impactful change, and how we align with that. So a really key question for us in all of our projects really comes down to BIM and digital technology. So my training is in architecture and in particular really complex formal softwares, generally things that aren't necessarily used in the architectural industry per se when it comes to construction, but really looking at really complex geometries and understanding how to manage that. So looking at BIM technologies becomes a really important thing. But I'm not here to talk about my research. I'm really here to talk about the school and some of the projects that we're undertaking. It's also maybe worth mentioning that as of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and definitely with the advent of us moving into the City Building Design Lab or the CBD Lab, we are now looking at industry-facing research in a really key way, and we're really looking at partnerships with other kinds of institutions like SATE and NATE, for example, as mechanisms to translate a lot of our research into practice through the training and testing and verification that can actually happen in institutions like this. So we certainly don't see ourselves as let's say, competitors in the academic landscape. We really want to understand, especially in the current budgetary condition, how we can enhance and partner with others to make that work. So I'll sort of work through this. I'll try to move through as quickly as possible and really get to items 4 and 5 is where I'd like to focus most of the talk. So the School of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape has not been this school for very long. We've been this school since April. Prior to that, we've had about 30 plus years of experience being the Faculty of Environmental Design. No one knew what that meant. This is a much more explicit description of what we do at the school. We have 3 first professional degrees in architecture, planning, and landscape architecture. We have an entrepreneurial focus. It's a lot about experiential and work-integrated learning. There's definitely a design and thinking through making. And we have unique facilities and resources, especially in the context of digital fabrication and individuals, especially our faculty and researchers who have professional experience in these territories. We are professional faculty, and in architecture, in many, many cases, the best academic institutions are not the ones with the most PhDs, but the ones with the most practice embedded in the faculty. I mentioned our 3 first professional degrees, architecture, planning, and landscape, but we also have 3 other degrees that we are using quite strategically. So PhD is fine, that's normal. But we have 2 other degrees that are less typical. The Master of Environmental Design is something that we use as a kind of in-between between our first professional master's degrees and PhDs or moving into industry. So what we do is we take our best and brightest hotshot students who are about to graduate from one of the first professional degrees and recruit them back into the ME-Des. Here we use things like MyTax Accelerate internships and other kinds of funding mechanisms to provide work-integrated learning experiences with industry so that our research is aligned with those problems. And at the core of those projects, we have the most talented students coming through the province doing design-based research. We also have another degree that's going to be initiated. It's been approved by the province, and our first cohort is going to be coming online in fall 2020, the Doctor of Design, or the DDes. This is where you take mid-career professionals, allow them to keep working, but they actually make a contribution academically. We see them as playing a key role in terms of functioning within blended and vertically blended research teams that can actually help facilitate high-level industry partnerships so that our research is actually going somewhere. So for example, let's say people in the innovation space with 20 plus years of experience in the construction industry might actually be operating as a central figure in our research projects, helping to bring additional partners and providing guidance while at the same time putting out peer-reviewed publications. The City Building Design Lab is something that we've had since February of this year. It was a really quick project that came online. So about a year ago, CMLC approached us and said, hey, do you guys want to occupy the vacant Central Public Library now that the city has the new library? We said yes, and now we occupy the main and basement floors of this building. So that accounts for between 24 and 25,000 square feet. There's classrooms, design studios, digital fabrication resources, such as large-scale 3D printers and robotics, conference rooms, a city building gallery, which is the only gallery in the city like this. It's open 7 days a week to the public for free. A 400-person event space. We'll talk a little bit more about the metrics in a second. We also have 60,000 square feet of vacant space above us that we don't control. And we're also kitty corner from the old Calgary Board of Education building. We are quite oriented around tackling the problem of vacancy in downtown Calgary. We think that we have a key role to play in both researching that problem, but also addressing it through populating space with researchers and innovators and partners on projects. So I think that there's a future for that. We will be in that building guaranteed for the next 5 years, effectively for free, during which we'll be making a case for us being down there for longer. The mission of the CBD Lab is to bring together graduate students, training a next generation of workforce, providing continuing education opportunities, and elevating public discourse around city building and design. So again, we see ourselves as, let's say, another component in a larger academic landscape where we're trying to transform the way that things are being done. The same way that BIM is a central technology and we're trying to advance the adoption of those things in order to meet larger performance metrics and targets both for clients and cities and stakeholders. But really we see design as a central part of doing that. We also align, just to get into a little bit of how we actually deliver this, we align quite well with the university's strategic research plan. So part of my role as Associate Dean Research is to match the opportunities with our capacity, to increase that capacity and to really do so with an emphasis on driving innovation and technology and design being at the center of that. This does mean that we need to be aligned with and partner with industry and communities in a really, really critical way. We don't want to be doing research that's out of step, but we also want to be able to move the needle. So that takes alignment, and that takes partnerships, and that takes collaboration. The CBD Lab itself, since February, we've hosted 118 events. We've had 6,000 plus people attend or participate in those. We have 17 completed or current research projects, over 500 students served, 8 gallery exhibitions, and a whole host of partners. Right now, we have a mass timber exhibition on that will be there, I believe, through January of 2020. Mass timber itself is going to be a territory that we're investing in very heavily over the next year. Again, not just locally, but regionally. So connections all the way over to Vancouver or through Nelson and across Alberta in terms of understanding the kinds of research that's happening at the U of A, very close partnerships with NATE and SAPL, and of course, partnerships with other researchers across our own university. That emphasis on Haskell for business and Schulich for engineering. But also, what is design-based research? In a lot of ways, people don't necessarily know that design is something that's researched. Everything is generally understood as sort of like studies and projects that are just data and evidence-based. We think that design-based research is really critical to advancing and enhancing evidence-based research and innovation. So, to put it in short, it's about a systemic but flexible methodology that actually results in real-world impacts that leads to new design principles and theories. So in a sense, we know that conventional wisdom is almost always wrong, and we think that finding alternatives to those sensibilities and those assumptions is really key, but they need to be translated into something that's usable for industry and application. So this is where new principles, new theories start to apply. BIM ends up functioning as a perfect platform for that because you can actually codify that into processes and products that actually deliver on objectives that we actually discover. What that looks like is quite wide-ranging. This is just a slide with a couple of images of anything from conceptual transportation designs to installed robotically fabricated installations, as well as looking at more optimal or efficient design for quick assembly or disassembly methods. One of the larger projects we've undertaken in the past couple of years is called Designing Out Waste. This is part of our FP Innovation Scholar in Residence program. So FP Innovation provides us with an endowment to which we have a fairly substantial amount of money on an annual basis to bring in experts in design and research in life cycle assessment. We brought in Casper Jensen from 3XN. He also is he was the principal of GXN, which is 3XN's innovation outfit from Copenhagen. There's huge emphasis on circular economy, which is one of the primary benefits of what BIM can actually provide a linchpin toward. So the idea of understanding how our built environment is already a material resource for us to transform and maintain. So things like operations management and asset management are central to notions of the circular economy. So even what was described by David in the previous presentation will have a huge role to play in the production of the circular economy. This project in particular was about taking decommissioned building components off of the old McKimmey Tower on campus, digitally refabricating those parts, and applying them to a mostly vacant downtown Calgary building to allow it to upgrade its valued or its class to go from a Class C building to a AA building, and to meet energy and performance targets in the process. The embodied energy gains on this are substantial, especially compared to tearing down an old building and making a new one. And we had another researcher come in and produce a tool that would verify that for us. This is Casper. He likes to hang out with our robots. These are just the robots we have on campus. They have a slightly larger payload than the universal robots we have downtown. The work manifested in a publication titled Designing Out Waste. It's been gaining a lot of traction. If you're interested in getting one, you can come to our website and get one. Another one of our more recent projects is the Green Alley project. This is done in partnership with the Calgary Downtown Association. It's a 3-year project. It's about transforming alleyways from underused service corridors to amenityscapes for the public. Fundamentally, it's about interdisciplinarity, and it's about the intersection between infrastructural systems, in particular, transportation, stormwater management, and waste management. Getting a handle on those things and being able to understand data inside of them and performance at all scales is really key. I'm a co-PI on NSERC Create grant titled Integrative Infrastructure for Sustainable Cities. One of the problems that we know exists within cities in general is that infrastructure produces the greatest threat to other infrastructural systems. So it's a competitive model. When you upscale one, it compromises the other. We take a more collaborative approach, both to break down, let's say, silos within government and practice, but also as a way to meet key performance and sustainability targets at a macro level across cities. Buildings and BIM being a really key infrastructure in that, because all infrastructure starts and ends at and with buildings. Really briefly, I'll talk a bit about our on-demand research process. So typically, academic grants and research takes place through really long cycle processes. You apply for a grant. If it's of any substantial value, it might take a year before you get that funding or know about it. And to do those things is really slow and tedious. In the spirit of alignment and collaboration, we still subscribe to the long form research frequency and leverage into that, but we also want to be responsive with our partners. So we have a process where we're able to vet and bring in projects, turn that around and match it with our capacity, both in terms of faculty, students, and our, let's say, our machinic resources, and turn that into projects that work on a much quicker cycle. And again, leverage that into the larger projects. So the idea of partners coming to us and getting value on that individual project, yes, you get that. There's the value that we provide, but we also leverage it into larger projects that are collaborative. And this diagram means something more, where each of these boxes might come with its own funding and layer on to a single project, such as the Green Alley project. We also feel like we have a kind of triple threat to what we're doing. So we serve students, partners, including industry in the city and communities, as well as the public at large. So for our projects to be able to do that is really key. We feel quite accountable to these three sort of entities or stakeholders. And we think that our partners also see the value in that kind of impact. Finally, on to BIM. Justin's going to be speaking maybe to this a little bit afterwards. There are challenges surrounding BIM. Even just a super quick review around implementation reveals some things that you're probably quite familiar with hearing about. You hear about legal barriers. Alan's certainly familiar with this. Cultural problems, management systems, economic and security issues. And you know, at the same time, there's actually not a lot of empirical work demonstrating the upside about this. So part of what our approach is about, it's about de-risking these kind of innovative spaces. So we know that when things don't quite fit into a business model, it's very difficult to commit resources. For us, especially in the leveraging model, partners can come in with a much lower risk profile on the project, collaboratively work together, demonstrate and prove it out, and then be able to take it back into market. So this is a really key approach to how we see our research. You know, I come from the South. I've been in Calgary for about 11 years now. But one of the key cultural differences I've noticed in Calgary and Canada, possibly in general, is that it's very hard to get people to buy into ideas that haven't been demonstrated before, right? So proving that things are possible is something that we think is really key in our pilot projects and something that we know will have lasting impact in the industry. If we can show that things work, then we know that we're doing our job. We don't just research and do studies in an esoteric, general way. We are much more about application. This is a nice list of a lot of those barriers to BIM implementation. I would argue, though, that it's missing one key thing which has to do with what I might describe as kind of contagion, which is to say businesses that have used BIM to serve their internal processes at the expense of it being a collaborative tool. What that means is that over time, industry has actually entrenched itself into a way where it's generated its business model on efficiencies that are only internal to that company. So it then means when you ask a company to deliver on, let's say, COBE standards, or going to PASL 11A2 or whatever, that they're actually handcuffed by their own legacy. That's something that we're quite interested in understanding a little bit better and helping companies break out of. Key drivers for adoption, again, these are probably issues that you're quite familiar with. I would even argue that these are the ones that are most familiar to CanBIM, advocating for these kinds of advancements, standards, requirements, designated organizations for implementation, and reporting and promotion of BIM. I would argue that we see ourselves as complementing this and focusing a bit more on those underserved aspects. So finding funding in the public sector, developing policy out of our pilot projects, and establishing BIM-oriented research programs. These are things that we can do to help. This is something that we're currently working on developing. We're in the process of sort of securing our industry partnerships around this. But it's a project that we're undertaking in partnership with the City of Calgary, as well as a variety of industry partners, where we want to understand the baseline of how and where industry currently is at in Calgary, especially on the AEC side of things, where they're at with BIM. This study is effectively free of charge for industry partners who are participating. All industry partners have to do is provide us with their BIM models and interview with their BIM managers to understand the network structure. But what this is about doing is trying to develop a way in which the City of Calgary, which is interested in going to an e-permitting process, what that process might look like. It tries to understand the relationship between project stakeholders and understand how to improve that. So as opposed to just the city developing a policy and saying, do it, we want industry engagement and buy-in to actually syncopate general consultant flows that the permitting process may be adapted to. And to do this, to actually create alignment, that we want to take an all boats rise approach to what this is, specifically around, let's say, certain project typologies or scales. So we see it as a really key opportunity that will baseline the current state of BIM, builds industry buy-in, identifies new BIM development milestones. So moving past just a development permit, building permit kind of frequency, but something that works in a more syncopated fashion that's more naturally embedded in, let's say, consultant-driven landscapes, and that we would provide a recommendation to the city that we would then pilot with industry partners. The deliverable on this project is really just a report that touches on these things. But again, the idea of getting cost-effective industry buy-in, which is to say free buy-in on the front end, so that we can actually design and develop a pilot project where these stakeholders would be engaged is what we're after. I think I'll just end there. If you have questions, the email is at the top. It's just the Associate Dean Research and Innovation email. And if you have interest in our research in general, below is the homepage for the website. So thanks very much.